All right, Shavuot say good morning. Let us begin a lot to do today. An incredible daf. Begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Iyar. Steve and Teri Czinn for dedicating all the Shurban Drushos this month in honor of their newest grandson, Matan Shmuel Aharon. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah he will grow to be an incredible Ben Torah. Mekadeshim Shemayim Ameh ve'Esrim Shanim Tovos. With that, let us begin. Today's daf is Chaf Vav 26, and we are picking up on Chaf Hamad Beis 25b, 3 lines up from the bottom. So remember again, we're dealing now with an interesting statement. I think Rabbi Richter mentioned this on Shabbos, that in this particular chapter, all of the Mishnayos are bunched into one Mishnah, right? So that's why all of the Mishnayos of Parak Dalid are actually all contained in that opening Mishnah of the Parak. So remember again, we're talking about now, Rav Nachman said that an islandess is not subject to the halachos of Sotah. So the Gemara says, Meisvei. So raise a kash on this. If a person delivers a kinui, right, a warning, ultimately again to his arusa and to his shomeres yavam, ad shelo kinsa nistra. So remember again, we spoke about yesterday that halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and deliver a kinui, deliver a warning, ultimately even to an arusa and to a shomeres yavam. But watch this. Imad shelo kinsa nistra. If halacha l'maisa she was in violation of the warning, before erisin, before nisuin or before yibum. So what's the halacha? Lo shosa v'lo noteles ksuvasa. She doesn't drink and she doesn't get her ksuva. Right? So remember again, you can't administer ultimately again the Sotah before nisuin or / yibum. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, if she's in violation of the warning, ultimately she can't drink, but she also doesn't get her ksuva. Fine. Tap of chavav. So we're just going to run through a whole bunch of cases right now. Tap of chavav. Me'uberes chavero u'meinekes chavero. What about if he's in violation and he marries a woman who is pregnant with someone else's child? Right? That's the halacha. Right? Not the halacha. That's the case. Meinekes chavero, a woman who is nursing someone else's child, which are illegal marriages. Lo shosos v'lo notlos ksuv derimer. We'll say same idea. Ultimately, again, such women do not drink, and therefore, again, also do not get their ksuvas. Because Rabbi said, Lo yisa adam u'beres chavero meinekes chavero. Rabbi said, a man may not marry a woman who is pregnant with someone else's child, or ultimately nursing someone else's child. Also, remember again, in both of these cases, what are we concerned about? We're concerned that halacha l'maisa, either for neglect of the pregnancy or compromising of the pregnancy, or neglect of the nursing child. V'im nasa, and what happens if you did violate and you did marry such a woman? Yotzi v'lo yachsir olamis. Now, Rabbi Meir holds that halacha l'maisa, if you did marry one of these women, which is an illegal marriage, halacha l'maisa, you have to divorce her, and you can never remarry her. Now, why can you never remarry her? This is a knas. It's a knas, right? There's a rabbinic penalty. The Chum say, Yotzi v'chshe'agias mana lichnos yichnos. The Chum on the other hand say that no, that halacha l'maisa, they agree you have to divorce her, but they disagree in that what? There's no penalty. In other words, that halacha l'maisa, once the requisite time elapses, i.e. she finishes going ahead and nursing the child, then halacha l'maisa, he is permitted to go ahead and remarry her. Fine. So I will say, so far this has nothing to do with our previous sugya. Watch this. Here we go. V'harova shenasa. Actually, this next Gemara I actually made reference to in yesterday's daf. It's interesting. V'harova shenasa akara uzekena. So we'll say Rova is a young man. What happens if a young man marries an akara, a sterile woman, or a zekena, ultimately an old woman? Now Rashi points out over here, Rova is bocher, right? The young man. Now we'll say, now what's the chap over here? The chap over here is he has not fulfilled periya v'rivya. So this is talking about a young man who has not yet had a family of his own. So Rova shenasa akara v'zekena ve'ein lo isha ubanim, right? Meikara, and he does not have, in other words, he doesn't have another wife, and therefore again he doesn't have children. What's the halacha? And Abba saying, now let's say he marries this woman, she becomes a sotah, meaning he warns her, she violates the warning. Now what's the halacha? Lo shosa, she does not go ahead and drink. V'lo notelas ksubasa, nor does she take a ksuba. Now both say, now in general, whenever you hear lo shosa, v'lo notelas ksuba, generally what that means is, this is an illegal marriage. So we spoke about this yesterday already. This concept, which is just in passing about it, so this concept ultimately again of being in a marriage which cannot produce offspring, which precludes ultimately again the husband from being mekayim peri v'rivya, is halachically problematic. Rabbi Elazar says, "Yochel hu lisa isha achares v'lifros v'lirbos yimen." Rabbi Elazar says it's not a problem. Why is it not a problem? It's not a legal marriage. Why is it not an illegal marriage? He can marry someone else. In other words, when we say marry someone else, is take another wife, right? He can have another wife. In fact, actually, we see Rashi Bereshis brings this down, that it was often very common. It was often very in biblical times. So very common for a man to be married to two women, one who was for peri v'rivya, for procreation, and one who was just for intimacy. For intimacy. So the idea over here, Rabbi Elazar says, halacha l'maisa, he does. Why is this an illegal marriage? He is allowed to marry someone else and ultimately, again, have children with that second wife. Aval. So we'll say, okay, so that's all the first part of this brisa. Now watch this. Aval, hamekanalar usasul shomeres yavam, but a person ultimately, and I will say, who warns his arusa and shomeres yavam. And I will say, so remember again, here's what we know. Here's what we know, just to be clear. A man in Erisin, or who's waiting to do Yibum, can deliver a proper kinui to his wife. Right? In other words, you could do kinui. You could warn it. So let's just go with Erisin, because it's easier, right? Ruvain did Erisin with Rachel. They're not living together. There's no nisuin. So what does he do? He tells Rachel, I don't want you to be alone with Shimon. Such a kinui, such a warning is effective. Now remember again, we'll say, in the first part of the brisa, what happened? Rachel violated the warning when? Before Nisuin, during Erisin. What's the halacha in that case? She doesn't drink. Now why doesn't she drink? So we'll say this goes back to Shabbos' daf. That's a technicality, because tachasi sheikh. The waters don't work unless, of course, she has first lived with her husband. So it's Erisin. She has not lived with her husband. So it's therefore the waters don't work. Now watch this. In the second part of the brisa, same case, Ruvain is giving a warning to his wife Rachel, who is in Arusa. They're in Erisin now. But watch this, Rabbi say. Umishekinsa nistera. I will say, in the second part of the brisa, when does she violate the warning? When is she violating the warning? After Nisuin. So this was a warning delivered during Erisin, but ultimately, again, she violates the warning during Nisuin. So what's the halacha? Oshosa olono tells ksubasa. So we'll say it's actually interesting. So in this case, this is a regular Sotah case. It just happens to be, interestingly enough, the warning was delivered during Erisin, but as long as the seclusion, the stira, was during Nisuin, it triggers a regular Sotah situation. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, she's a Sotah, or she's in the parish of Sotah, and therefore she has a choice. Either what? Drink, or get divorced without a ksuv forfeiture. Fine, next. Mi'uberes u'meinekes atzmo. So it's an interesting case. This is, if Reuven's married to Rachel, and Rachel is pregnant with Reuven's child, or Rachel is nursing Reuven's child, so what's the halacha? Oshosa olono tells ksuvas. And now she becomes a Sotah. Same case, he warned her. She violated the warning. So now we'll say, what's the halacha? Either she drinks or she gets divorced without a ksuva. Now we'll say, now what's the chiddush in that case? So Rashi points out the chiddush in that case is we don't say wait for the child to be self-sufficient. In other words, we'll say you might have thought that when a woman becomes a Sotah, if she is pregnant, maybe we say, you know what, let her have the baby, and then we'll deal with the Sotah situation. Or if she's nursing, let her finish nursing the child, and then we'll go ahead and deal with Sotah. Kamash Malon, no. Kamash Malon will say that what the Bryce is teaching us is, if she becomes a Sotah, we deal with that right then and there, recognizing full well that what? This could have a detrimental impact on an unborn child, or ultimately again on a nursing child. We recognize that, but the Sotah process must proceed now. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. And what happens if a young man marries a woman who is sterile, or a zakina, or an older woman, neither could have children? But also he has a second wife, and with that second wife, he has children. So and then either the akara or the zakina becomes a Sotah. Oshosa olo notelas ksubasa. Either ultimately again she drinks, or she gets divorced without a ksubas. So again, pointing out the Bryce has two parts. So if you notice again, essentially, right, in the first part, all the cases in the first part are re-outlined in the second part, just with a little bit of a twist, which makes them eligible for the Sotah process. Incredible. Eishes mamzer the mamzer. So we'll say ultimately again, if a woman is married to a mamzer, right? Which means that if you have a mamzer couple, right? The mamzer couple, ultimately again, she too could be subject to the Sotah process. Ve'eshes nisin, we'll ask exactly what the chiddush of that is. Eshes nisin linisin. Same thing in the we'll say if you have a nesina who's married to a nesina. We've spoken about the nesinim a number of times, right? The nesinim ultimately again were these individuals again, who, kind of like the kusim, whose conversion was subject to some level of dispute. So, but in any event, again, the wife of a nesin who's married, right? The wife of a nesin is also subject to the Sotah process. Ve'eshes ger, ve'eved meshuchrar, va'ilinis. And I will say ultimately again, the wife of a ger, right? The wife of a ger, or the wife of an emancipated eved. I will say, what is essentially in halacha, an emancipated eved, an eved meshuchrar, has the same status as a ger, as a convert. So I will say these women ultimately again are subject to the Sotah process. And I will say here it is, va'ilinis. And an islandess is subject to the Sotah process. O shosa, either she drinks, o lo notelas ksuvasa, or she doesn't get her ksuva. So I will say that was a very long brisa just to get to that last line, which tells us that what? An islandess does drink. So therefore I will say that directly contradicts Rav Nachman, who said on the top of Chav He'am and Beis that what? An islandess does not drink. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, Katani miha, islandess. So what do you see in the Brisa? The Brisa says an islandess is subject to Sotah and does drink the Sotah waters. To which the Gemara says, Tiyufta Rav Nachman. It obviously is a refutation of Rav Nachman. So how would Rav Nachman respond? Rav Nachman, no. Tanoihi. No, 1 second. Hold up. This is a machlokes tanoim. Whether or not an islandess drinks. Va'anav da'amri ki hay tana. Rav Nachman says, I happen to hold like the following Tana. What does the Tana say? Tisanya, Rabbi Shmuel Silber says, islandess lo shosa velo notelas ksuvas ksuva. Rabbi Shmuel Silber says an islandess, or we'll say, so remember again, an islandess is married to a man, right? Let's say Rachel is an islandess married to Ruvain. Ruvain warns her not to be alone with Shimon. Rachel is in violation of that warning. Stira. So now I'll say, so Rabbi Shmuel Silber says, what's the halacha? She cannot be given the Sotah waters, and therefore velo notelas ksuvasa. Therefore, what ends up happening? She gets divorced without a ksuva. Now, we'll say, now, why can't she drink the Sotah waters? Shneimar v'niksa v'nizra zera. Because Rabbi will say by the Sotah, what does the pasuk say? V'niksa will say means if she's innocent. If she's innocent. So what happens if she's innocent? V'nizra zera. Interestingly enough, the waters themselves almost act like a fertility treatment, right? And ultimately cause her to conceive. So we'll say, what does this mean? So therefore, what do we dash in from here? Mi shedarka lahazriya. So we'll say, what you see from here is who is subject to the Sotah process? Only a woman who is in the parsha of pregnancy. Yotza sazu she'in darka lahazriya. Ultimately, this comes to exclude an islandess. So I will say, now it only excludes an islandess. For example, it doesn't exclude a zakena, and it doesn't exclude an akara. Why not? Because these women are in the parsha of pregnancy. Anyway, the parsha of pregnancy, physically, right? They have the physiology, right? The physiology in order to be able to conceive. The islandess is in a different parsha because the whole chap of an islandess is she lacks the reproductive organs. So Lamais again, Rabbi Shmuel Silber says, if a woman is not in the parsha of the niksa, V'nizra azera, she doesn't go ahead and drink the Sotah. So it's a technicality. It's technicality. Therefore, again, Rav Nachman says it's a machlokes. It's a machlokes tanaim about whether or not an islandess is subject to the halachos of Sotah. And therefore, again, I hold like Rishon Elazar who says that she's not. Incredible. For Rabbanon, high v'niksa v'nizra zera my avilei. What do the Rabbanon do with this pasuk? Right. Remember again. So the Rabbanon hold that an islandess is subject to the halachos of Sotah. So what do they do with this phrase v'niksa v'nizra azera? So it was incredible. My avilei is incredible. They use it for fun. V'niksa v'nizra zera. So what does that come to? Listen to this. Shimhai sakara nifked. That's Tiv Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva says something amazing, that the Sotah waters actually had a profound effect, which is that if a woman was unable to conceive, the Sotah waters would help her conceive. Incredible. So let's listen to this. Rabbi Shmuel said, Rabbi Akiva, do you understand what a Pandora's box you're opening up? Watch this. Imkain yistiru kol ha'akaros v'yifkidu. We'll see what's going to happen. So we'll say, remember again, we'll say infertility is an incredibly painful experience. So if a woman knows that the truth is there is a guaranteed fertility treatment. We'll say, what is she going to do? She's going to make herself a Sotah. And we'll say, by the way, it's also very easy to become a Sotah. I mean, not very easy to become a Sotah. Remember again, all she needs to do is it requires her to act inappropriately, because remember again, the act in order to get the warning means that ultimately again the husband feels something wrong. Unless I guess of course they could conspire together. Right? They could also conspire together. The point over here is she could exploit the system. Right? Go ahead, become a Sotah just in order to be able to drink the waters. And I will say again, by the way, it's such a profound Gemara, because understand the Sotah process is such a humiliating process, right? Remember again, on both sides, we saw this before, right? Remember again, she's taken to the Beis Hamikdash. Her hair is uncovered. Her clothing is torn, right? She brings this mincha, that's a meichel behema. Everyone's watching. On both sides, you see something amazing. You see, by the way, how strong that desire is for a woman to have children. And how at the end of the day, ultimately, again, she'd be willing to do anything and everything for the ability to go ahead and have a family. Even subject herself to this debasement, even subject herself to this embarrassment, to this humiliation, to this pain. I would say, it just gives you a little bit of an insight into the window of the pain of those struggling with infertility. And the sensitivities, I would say, in general, just a sensitivity. You never know in life, in general, you never know what the person next to you is struggling with. And I will say kind of like innocuous statements, like a person complaining about having to drive their children's carpools. Right? Carpool is incredibly annoying, right? I will say, but you never know. You say that within earshot of someone struggling with infertility, and that person thinking to themselves, I would quit my day job to go ahead and, which sometimes you feel like you do have to quit your day job in order to drive all the carpools, right? I will say, but lamaisa, right? A person overhearing this, or a person like sometimes I will say also like it's normal. A person has a difficult day with their kids, so just complaining about your kids, like again, a person just has to always bring a sensitivity. You never know what someone else is struggling with, what someone else is dealing with, and I will say, you see that infertility is such a painful process. It's a havamina that a woman would make herself a Sotah in order to be able to conceive and have children. That's the lengths that a person would go to. So Rishon says Rabbi Akiva, if that's the case, that the Sotah waters ultimately again could cause a woman to conceive, aren't we worried about exploitation? And then I will say what? If a woman wants to remain pious, doesn't want to be subject to the Sotah water, she's going to lose out on this guaranteed fertility treatment. So therefore, again, Rabbi Shmuel disagrees with Rabbi Akiva. He says it can't be that the Sotah waters are a fertility treatment, right? And if you were unable to conceive, suddenly you're able to conceive, because otherwise you're setting yourself up for the exploitation of Sotah waters. Rather, what must it mean? What does it mean ultimately? Again, when the pasuk says, if she is innocent, that nizra zera means seed will be sown. Shem haisi yoledes b'tzar, yoledes berevach. Both say what it means is, if normally she had difficult pregnancies, as a result of the Sotah water, she'll have easier pregnancies. Nekevos, yoldim zucharim, and if she only had girls, now she'll have some boys. Ktsarim, yoledes haruchim, she had short kids, now she'll give birth to tall kids. Shchorim, yoledes levanim, she had children who are not so good looking, right now she'll have children who are good looking. Right, say that's lashon about it. That's lashon of shachar lovan. Shachar lovan doesn't have to mean black and white. Shachar lovan means, not so good looking, challenged, and now she'll have good looking kids. So I just want to point out. So let's pause here just a second. So now remember, how do we get into this whole discussion? All of this began with a statement of Rav Nachman. What did Rav Nachman say? That an aylinus is not subject to the Sotah process. The Gemara brings down this entire brayso, and this entire discussion was just to dispute that one statement. Because remember again, the bottom line of the brayso was that no, halach l'maisa, an aylinus is subject to the Sotah process. So we'll say, how do we reconcile it? Very simple. Say machlokes tanoim. Machlokes tanoim. And interestingly enough, what is the machlokes tanoim based on? What is machlokes tanoim based on? The way you dash in one phrase in a pasuk, v'niksa, v'nizra zera. Literally translated, v'niksa, like nakeh, she'll be innocent, v'nizra zera. And nizra zera means literally, the seed will be sown. What does that phrase mean? So I will say, Rabbi Shmuel will say, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, that Allah it means that it tells you that only a woman who is capable of conceiving ultimately goes ahead and is subject to the Sotah process. Therefore what? An aylinus who is incapable of conceiving is not subject to the Sotah process. So both say, and now Rav Nachman says, I hold like Rav Shimon ben Elazar, and that's how he excluded aylinus from the Sotah process. What about those who say that an aylinus is subject to the Sotah process? What do they do with this pasuk of v'niksa v'nizra zera? So this is machlokes now Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva says it teaches us that halacha l'maisa, if she had an inability to conceive, ultimately she's able to become pregnant. Rabbi Shmuel says that's crazy because now you're setting this up for exploitation. Rather, what it means is if she's innocent, the Sotah help her with her future pregnancies. They become a little bit easier, right? Or whatever they may be. She is able to have sons, not just girls. They're able to have good-looking kids, tall kids, whatever it might be. That's supposed to say. Therefore, everything hinges on the interpretation of that pasuk of v'niksa, v'nizra zera. Bottom line, machlokes tanaim, whether or not an aylinus is subject to the process of the Sotah. Good, let's go weiter. So we'll say, so now we're going to dissect this brayso. Eishes mamzer mamzer. So I said, remember again, the brayso said that the wife of a mamzer is subject to the Sotah process, to which the Gemara says, pshita. I don't understand, we'll say, what's the chiddush there? Right, remember again, when a mamzer marries a mamzer, that's a regular halachic marriage. So why does the brayso have to tell me that she's subject to mamzerus? So I will say, this is incredible. Pshita, ma'adatema, afushe psulin lo lefush. I will say, this is fascinating. We'll say, what's the whole purpose of the Sotah process? It sounds a little strange, but the whole point of the Sotah process is to allow the couple to reconcile. Right? That's the whole idea. In other words, there's a breakdown of trust in this marriage. Right? A husband doesn't warn his wife if he trusts her. Right? A warning is only given if there's a lack of trust. And then ultimately, again, that lack of trust is compounded by the stira. And now what ends up happening? Now they come to the Beis HaMikdash. What's the whole point of this process? It sounds strange, but to rebuild trust within the marriage. Most listen to this, hallelujah. I might have thought we shouldn't rebuild trust in the marriage of mamzerim. Rather, what should we do? Let them get divorced. Why Rabbi say? Because you know what two mamzerim go ahead and create? We'll say, by the way, it's also a good lesson in life in a hashkafic sense as well. Right? When you have two parents who are both mamzerim, right? Chances are their kid's going to be mamzerim also. Or as I will say, if you want, in other words, and I mean that not in the genealogical sense, but in the midos sense. Let's say the midos of the parents are very often passed down to the children, right? Two parents who are mamzerim in their midos ultimately will have kids who are mamzerim in their midos as well. So important for parents to make sure to possess and to pass down the right character traits. In any event, I would have thought in the genealogical sense that if halacha l'maisa, maybe we don't want the mamzer parents to reconcile. Why? Because we don't want more mamzerim. To which the Gemara says, Kamash no. Both say, Kamash no, we want them to reconcile. They both say, now here's what's interesting. Right? Here's what's interesting. Both say, because what do you see from here? A mamzer is still, right? These are still good Jews. Otherwise, we'll say at a certain point, remember, they're obviously in the mamzer chain, what you have over here is you have two people who did something wrong, ultimately creating mamzerus. For future generations, they didn't do anything. They're just stuck with the genealogical designation. So halacha l'maaseh, again, they're good Jews. They're regular parts of the community. So it's very, very important yesod. Everyone is part of the community with all of their baggage. So in other words, the havamina is we don't want a mamzer couple to reconcile. Kamash malan, yes we do. Because I will say even the mamzer couple is a part of the community as well. And therefore, ultimately, again, we want them to reconcile, to have shalom bayis as well. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Eishes ger ve'evin meshuchrar v'aylan is pshita. So we'll say same thing, the wife of a ger, or the wife of an evin meshuchrar. These are also subject to the Sotah water. So pshita, we'll say it's obvious. Ma'udetema, daber al b'nei Yisrael v'lo gerim. So we'll say interesting, the Sotah process, the Parsha Sotah is introduced with the phrase, daber al b'nei Yisrael. I'm at a thought that dafka means only naturally born Jews and not gerim. Kamash malon, no. Ve'ema hachinami. So maybe that is true. Va'amarta ribuyahu. We'll say the word va'amarta comes to include everyone, even gerim. Incredible. Eishes kohen shosa. So we'll say the wife of a kohen drinks the salt of water. So pshita. That's obvious. Ma'atem, what would you have thought? Ve'hilon ispasa asura. Han ispasa mutares. So let's listen to this. The pasuk by Sotah says that if she had relations with another man and she was not coerced, she was not violated, right? Because if a woman is violated, then ultimately, again, she's permitted to her husband. I, Bravo, said, but that's not true by Kohen. By Kohen Chas Shalom, even if his wife is violated, she remains asura to him. So because of that, perhaps I might have thought that she is not subject to the Sotah process. Emalo Tishta, Kamashmulo, know that she still drinks. Umutaris Labaila, and she becomes permitted ultimately again to her husband. So we'll say, so this is actually interesting. After she drinks, she becomes mutaris to her husband. So we'll say, so what's the chiddush? Of course, after she drinks. If she doesn't die, she's mutaris to her husband. We'll say, watch this. So pshita amrav huna bemisnavna. We'll say, what's the case? The case is where after drinking the water, she slowly begins to degrade. Right? Misnavna means she begins to waste away. And yet the Bryce is still saying that she's mutaris to her husband. The Gemara says mutaris to her husband. Misnavna habat gomar. We'll say, we just said before. We'll say again. Remember what happens if after she drinks the water, she does not die immediately, but she begins to immediately waste away. What happens? We'll say. Remember again. What is that indicative of? She is guilty, but what? Zchus. Zchus. So how could she be permitted to her husband? Right, it's clear again if she's beginning to waste away after the water that clearly she did something. She just has a schus, not did something. She committed adultery. She just happens to have a schus to stave off the full effects of the water. To which the Gemara says, "B'misnamna derech evarim." But I will listen to this. Now, I don't know that we mentioned this explicitly. I will say when a woman when we have a schus, when we have a situation of a woman who committed adultery, but a schus that staves off the effect of it, I will say she begins to waste away specifically by her stomach and her thigh. The effects of the water are felt immediately in those two areas of the body, as those are the first areas of contact, ultimately, again, for bia, for relations. We're talking about a case where she drank the water, I will say, and after drinking the water, she suffers a health setback, but in other parts of her body. Other parts of her body. So we'll say, Ma'udetema, Hazanui Zanoi, Vahadlobat Kuamaya, Kiach Rishun Va'oni Zanoi. I might have thought that maybe again, really she suffered a health setback because of the waters, right? And the reason ultimately she's not suffering the health setback by the thigh and by the stomach is because again, maybe there was something different. Maybe again, she was somewhat coerced into this adultery. Maybe there was something mishuna about it, to which the Gemara says, To which the Gemara says, both say, see, that's an incredible Gemara. Both say, so this is what the Gemara is saying like this. What happens if after the Sotah waters, right, the woman suffers a health setback, but it's not the health setback by her stomach and her thigh, right? Some other health setback. You might have thought that the health setback is somehow related to the waters. Kamash Malon, the only health setback related to the waters is when it dafka affects what? Her stomach and her thighs. Right? That's it. Any other health setback, I will say, is what? Just a health condition. In other words, I will say, after you drink the Mei Sotah, you are not guaranteed a life of health. In other words, you can still get sick. Right? You can still get, so let's say, so Kamash, one with Gemara's teaching me is that Allah, if she suffers a different type of health setback in the aftermath of her waters, that's just a health condition, nothing to do with the waters, and she remains permitted ultimately again to her husband. Incredible. Eishes Sris Shosa, the wife of a Sris, what is a man who's sterile, could drink. To which the Gemara says, Pshita, that's obvious. What would you have thought? Who's supposed to say again? Remember the sterile. The pasuk says that by adultery she slept with someone other than her husband, and this guy who's sterile maybe is not capable ultimately again of a normal act of bia. So maybe again she should not go ahead and be subject to Sotah. Kamashron that she is. Ayidei kalarayos mekanin. So we'll say. So remember again. Ultimately, one could issue a kinui for any erva, any man who is an erva to his wife. He can issue a kinui. So pshita, that's obvious. Amud beis. Ma'al detema nitma shtei pamim. So we'll say the pasuk says nitma twice. Echad lebal ve'echad leboel. One is to teach her. We'll say that if she did commit adultery, she is prohibited. We'll say Chafal base 26b second line to teach us that if she does commit adultery, she's a surah to her husband and a surah to the adulterer. So I might have thought as follows: Heichad dekam misra b'haznos. I might have thought the only time that the Sotah process takes effect is when the adulterer is someone who is asura to her as a result of this act of adultery. But beforehand would have been technically someone who was permitted to her. Aval ha hoil va'asura v'kaima. Maybe if someone was a pre-existing erva, ultimately emalo, perhaps he would not be subject to the Sotah process. Kamash Rabbi say, this is very important. What does this teach us? Rabbi say, what about, imagine the following situation. Let's say, Reuven is married to Rachel, and Reuven says to Rachel, listen to this, I don't like the way you behave with your brother. As terrible as that sounds, right? And he gives her kinui for her brother. They'll say, that is a proper kinui. That works. And why? Because a brother is an erva. What the Bryce is teaching about say is that any man who is an erva to this woman is subject to the Sotah process. And the Havamina is, I might have thought that the Sotah process only applies to someone for whom there is not a pre-existing prohibition, right? Her brother is an erva beforehand. Kamash Malon, the Sotah process devolves upon someone even if he is a pre-existing erva. Incredible. Okay? Chutz mina katan. So I'll say, remember again, the exception is a katan, right? Remember again, so I'll say, so Reuven, the husband, cannot give his wife kinui regarding a katan, regarding a child. To which the Gemara says, it's obvious, ish amrach wana v'lo katan. I will say, because the pasuk says ish. Right? Since it says ish comes to exclude what? A man and not a child. So Allah L'maisa, if Reuven were to go ahead and give his wife kinui for a child, for a katan, ultimately, again, that would not trigger the Sotah process. Now, both say when we say that someone is not a man, who does that come to exclude? So, maybe it comes to exclude a man who's impotent. Yet, the will say that's what you could even go ahead and give kinui for a shachov for a man who's impotent. Upos sabat ultimately, I will say, and interestingly enough, relations with a man who is impotent, ultimately again could passel or could make her ineligible to eat truma. That will say, now this would be ultimately again, if this was the type of guy, for example, let's say it was an oved kochavim, someone with whom relations with prohibit a woman from eating truma, relations with such a man ultimately again could prohibit truma. So the Gemara says, "Mekan al yado," we could issue a warning on his behalf, which Rabbi means, in other words, that a man could go ahead and Reuven could say to Rachel, "I don't want you to be alone with this guy." Right? And let's say everyone knows this guy is impotent. Look, some people are just open books, right? Right. So Lamaisa again, right? So Lamaisa, everyone knows. Nevertheless, he could deliver proper kinui for this individual. So Madutemo, I would have thought v'shachar ish also shechvas zera. The pasuk says when speaking about adultery, we'll say it's interesting. How does the Torah describe adultery? And she will sleep with a man who's not with her husband, who's not her husband. Shechvas zera. I will say now. Here's what's interesting. Shechvas zera could literally mean emission of seed. Emission of seed. Shechvas zera could also mean just like sleeping with someone else. Lav dafka, that it actually results in the emission of seed. V'hala barhachi, he's not capable of producing seed. Kamash Shmuel, no, it's still considered to be adultery. So it was a very interesting halacha. So therefore, halacha l'maisa again, if a husband gives kinui to his wife regarding a man who for some reason everyone knows is shachav, is impotent, that is still halacha l'maisa proper kinui, and adultery with such a man is still considered to be adultery as well. Upos salvatruma, and ultimately again he could also go ahead and relations with this man if he is apostle, right? If he is genealogically impaired, could also go ahead and prevent a woman from eating truma. So pshita, that's obvious. What you would have thought, lo yichalal zaro. The pasuk says he shall not profane his offspring. So I might have thought, I might have thought the isle zera lechalal. If someone is capable of having offspring, perhaps they should profane. Otherwise, we'll say perhaps they should negatively impact women from eating truma. The lesle zera lo lechalal. If they can't have offspring, perhaps they also don't have the ability to go ahead and prevent women from eating truma in the future. Kamash malano. So I'll say, so perhaps again it comes to exclude a non-Jew. Meaning what we'll say, that a husband can't warn his wife about being alone with a non-Jew. Interesting, right? That a non-Jew would not be subject to kinui. Rav Hamnuna said that a husband can go ahead and give kinui to his wife about a non-Jew, and ultimately relations with a non-Jew could prevent women from eating truma. So Mekan Ayodop Shita. The Gemara says, of course a husband could deliver a warning to his wife about being alone with a non-Jew. Why? I might have thought nitma. The pasuk says nitma twice. Sheipan. And also, what does that teach us? Like we saw before, echad lebal ve'echad leboel. One is to teach me that if there was adultery, she's prohibited to her husband, and the second one is teaching that she's prohibited to the adulterer. So I might have thought, heichad dikamisera b'haznus. I will say that's only when she becomes prohibited to the adulterer as a result of this act of relations. Aval ha, when it comes to a non-Jew, hoil va'asura v'kaimar. But remember again, she is already prohibited to him. Why is she already prohibited to him? Because he's not Jewish. So I might have thought, Aval ha, hoil va'asura v'kaimar, emalo. I might have thought that perhaps he is not subject to Sotah process. Kamash Rabbi says, this is very interesting. The Gemara is saying that a husband can, in fact, warn his wife about being alone with a non-Jew, and that would ultimately go ahead and trigger the Sotah process. Uposal truma, and relations with a non-Jew could prohibit a woman from consuming truma. So pshit, that's obvious. So what would you have thought? Ma'odetema ubas kohen kisiya leish zar amarachmana. Pasuk says, and if a bas kohen will marry an ish zar, we'll say, remember again, just to frame this correctly, bas kohen literally is a daughter of a kohen. As a daughter of a kohen, what can you eat? Truma. Now what happens? She gets married to an alien man. Who's an alien man, so to speak? Non-kohen. A non-kohen. What's the halacha? So we'll say, so that's when she can't eat truma. So I will say, by the way, so the bar havia in the lav bar havia lo. I might have thought you both say it's only relations with a man with whom she could technically marry that render her unfit to eat truma. But relations with a man who cannot impact her marital status, i.e., a non-Jew. Right? you cannot halachically marry a non-Jew. So I might have thought that halacha l'maisa, it wouldn't passel her from eating truma. Ultimately, we'll say, what do we learn? We learn that no, relations with a non-Jew still prevent the woman from eating truma. Mid Rabbi Yochanan. Where do we learn? It's from Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, Mishra Mishmal. Was very interesting. From where do we know that in Oved Kochavim, an Eved who had relations with a Kohenes or a Levia or a Bas Yisrael, that they prevent her from eating truma? I will say now, what I want to point out is there's three cases over here. One is talking about a case of a Bas Kohen who has relations with one of these men, let's say an Akum, right? She can no longer eat truma. I will say the other women, if they have relations with an Akum, even if they subsequently marry a Kohen, they can't eat truma because they can't really marry a Kohen. We'll see on Shneimar, Ubas Kohen kisiya amana ugrusha. The pasuk says, if a Bas Kohen, now this is an interesting case, another case. A Bas Kohen goes ahead and marries. A Bas Kohen goes ahead and marries. So we'll say, so now what happens? And now let's say she marries Yisrael. After she marries, what happens? Her husband dies. So what's the halacha? If there are no children, she is permitted to go back to her father's home and consume truma. So I'll say, what do we learn from here? What situation allows her to go back to her father's home if there's no offspring to consume truma? What type of marriage? Only the type of marriage which results in legitimate almanos and gerushin, i.e. legitimate marriage. Yotzu ovi kochav ve'eved she'ein lo almanos ve'gerushin. But the Bible says this comes to exclude a case of where she had relations, ultimately again with an oved kochavim, or she was married to an oved kochavim, where even if that marriage ends, halacha l'maisa, she can never again consume truma. Whereas relations with an akum prevents a bas kohen, for that matter, any other woman from ever going ahead and eating truma again. Ve'ela lemi utemai. So Rabbi says, so therefore, what does it come to exclude? So Rabbi says, I just want to point out, so just, it's interesting, we're just trying to figure out who is it that is excluded from the Sotah process. So it's not an akum, because apparently, again, a husband, we'll talk about this more, but a husband can warn his wife against going ahead and being alone with an akum. Not only that, I will say, but by the second halacha, relations with an akum preclude a woman from ever eating truma. Interesting, right? So we'll say, so what does it come to? So we'll say, so who is excluded from the Sotah process? Interesting case. Interesting. So let's say a husband warns his wife not to be alone with an animal, right? A certain animal. Okay. Our job is not to ask why, right? Our job is just to learn, right? They'll say, right? She doesn't like the way, right? He doesn't like the way that she's interacting with the ox, right? Or with the, I don't know, whatever. It's too strange. And I'll say, so whatever it is, right? He doesn't like, so he warns her, don't be alone with the animal. Okay. So the Gemara says, why will say now? Why can't he warn her against being alone with the animal? Because there is no zinus with an animal. I will say, I want to point out something very interesting. There isn't isidoraisa bestiality. But I will say, but when we say there's no zinus with the behemoth, what that means is there is no, what we'll call it, halachic categories. There's a halachic category of bestiality, which ultimately, again, is a chiyuv misa. But that's not called znus. In other words, it's not called an act of immorality. What we'll call, we'll say, like, come on, let's stick to good old immorality, right? Right? So good old immorality is just people, right? So that's called znus. Right? Bestiality is in a totally separate category of base behavior. So therefore, I will say, Sotah governs znus. So we'll say, from where do we know this idea of ein znus bebehema? So we'll say, where is that concept that there is no znus by an animal? We'll say, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Meretz Hashem. That's a good way to end, right? Good way to end. Oh, okay. I wish I got a few more lines in. Sorry about that. Well, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Meretz with the sugya of znus for behema Meretz Hashem. We'll say, shkoyach.
It's like that.